Good morning to the last day of DebConf. This is where we all go, oh. There we go. But we get to listen to John Sullivan this morning, the Executive Director of the Freedom Software Foundation. See? And he's talking about just don't buy it, consumer choices in free software activism. John, we look forward to listening to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm so happy to have this chance to share some thoughts and ideas with you this morning. I'm also so sad that this whole thing is almost over this year. I want to say thank you to the local team here and to the DebConf team as a whole. You all have done an awesome job. I know what it takes to run an event, and you really pull it together in an amazing way year after year. So thank you very much. And I've had personally an amazing time here in Curitiba. I've had an amazing time here in Curitiba, and I've even gotten a little bit of Debian work done this year, which has been awesome. Yeah. And I want to give a quick shout out to Valesio, who actually interned with the FSF in Boston this year and was a big help in running our own conference, LibrePlanet. So I wanted to give him a thanks for that. It was great to have him in the office there. And thank you to Brunel for letting me use your laptop. It turns out there is no laptop with a free boot firmware, LibreBoot, that is compatible with HDMI. My adapter works about 75% of the time, but not at DebConf. So thanks for saving my butt here. So I've been with the FSF since 2003. I've had various hats during that time. And the most relevant one for this talk is that I was the FSF's first campaigns manager. I became the executive director in 2011. I was also, in my non-FSF time, been a Debian developer since 2010. But I am definitely giving this talk on behalf of the FSF, so that's the hat that I'm wearing for this talk. Just imagine it's there. So I think probably people in Debian are largely familiar with the FSF, but I just do want to put our mission up here to emphasize the fact that we want to make sure that everything that anybody wants to do with any piece of software on any computer can be done with free software. And I think in many ways Debian shares this goal. I see this as kind of inherent in the definition of a universal free operating system. It's just that in Debian we may prefer that the things that are done on any computer be done with Debian. In this talk, I want to share some stories about FSF campaigns over the years, things that I found that have stood out to me. I also want to try and provide some useful tools for your advocacy kit as free software advocates and activists. I want to point to a few specific resources and ongoing initiatives that you might be interested in helping out with. Hopefully, I will save some time at the end so that some folks can share their experiences and knowledge about the topics in this talk as well. If I don't, I'm sorry, and I will be here until tomorrow morning and would love to chat with everybody about their ideas after the talk. And I want to spend a little bit of time considering Debian's role in free software activism as a project, as a group. But also a goal of working on this talk and putting it together for me is to do research and to try to learn from other social movements and campaigns and other areas of human life in order to be able to improve our strategies at the FSF for bringing about change. At the FSF, we have a primary goal of wanting free software, and in particular free software ethics, to become what's often called a kitchen table issue, something that people talk about, consider as a primary political concern in their lives, the same way as they might talk about healthcare or the unemployment rates. Free software is something that's affecting so many people in their daily lives, whether or not they write or know anything about it, that we want the ethical side to be something that everybody thinks about. In my case, it's not really a kitchen table issue. It's more of a couch in front of the TV issue, but you get the point, I think. One thing this talk isn't is well-researched. Like I say, this is a work in progress. This is me trying to share some things that I've learned through direct experience in helping to run campaigns at the FSF, and also just in the reading that I have done so far. But I would love pointers to resources that have been helpful to you for understanding these issues, and I do continue to dig deeper and deeper into the research on social movements, and in particular, economic instruments for achieving social change on an ongoing basis. So the title of this talk, Just Don't Buy It, comes from something I've heard a lot from people over the years who aren't necessarily fully on board with the kind of activism work that we're doing at the FSF. These people typically think that we should not be campaigning against non-free software. We should only be promoting free software. We'll talk about how free software is good, don't talk about how non-free software is bad, and focus energy on making free software just better. And so what we hear from that sector is something like, if you don't like Apple, what Apple is doing, just don't buy Apple. Right? If you don't like what Microsoft is doing, just don't buy Microsoft. Why are you protesting Microsoft or Apple? Why are you publishing things criticizing Microsoft and Apple? And there's kind of an underlying assumption here, which is that people should be able to buy what they want. Fair enough. And if you don't like a company's product, you just shouldn't buy it. And Nike's logo, for those blissfully unaware, is connected with the slogan, "Just do it." So when we talk about consumer activism, so this is that's kind of the extreme view, that phrase, "just don't buy it." It pipes basically all activism through decisions about what to buy and what not to buy. So when I'm talking about consumer activism, I'm focusing on mainly two kinds of things: efforts to persuade you to buy this thing and to not buy that thing. So people also sometimes call this moral purchasing or ethical consumerism. And within that category, I've picked out kind of three major tactics to talk about. The first one being boycotts. That's the straight up, don't buy from this company. Second one, certifications, which are showing that a product meets some certain set of ethical standards. Buying guides, which are lists of products that people that are concerned about particular issues might be interested in supporting. And these tactics, they make a lot of intuitive sense, right? It's like, we have money, we can spend it. The way we spend it is a form of power. It's a form of rewarding somebody for something. So we can reward companies that do good things, we can punish companies that do bad things, all just through our individual choices. So when I was putting this together, I realized I didn't really know where the word boycott came from. Well, it turns out there was somebody actually named Charles Boycott. And he got his local community very upset with him. And so he tried to evict 11 tenants from his land, but soon found himself isolated. His workers stopped working in the fields and stables and in his house, and the local businessmen stopped doing business with him, and the local postman refused to deliver his mail. So was boycotted, and that's where we get the term boycott. This is just a short list of the most famous boycott examples / current that came to my mind. We have the Montgomery bus boycott in the United States, was part of the start of or a key moment, I should say, on the civil rights movement. We had recently in North Carolina, the state where I currently live, was boycotted on a large scale because of a bill, HB2, a law, HB2, which said that you had to use restrooms that matched your birth sex, as they called it. And the National Football League in the United States has been boycotted by many people for the fact that they started sanctioning players who kneeled during the national anthem at the start of a game. So basically, players trying to stage a form of protest at the start of a football game. The league cracked down on that, and so people decided to stop watching football. We have seen a lot lately with companies who work with the Immigration and Customs Enforcement in the United States, supplying them with equipment or software training. We're seeing some boycotts focused on companies that provide those services in order to pressure them to not do that. And the second tactic of certifications, I put one up that I'm just immediately familiar with, which is the Leaping Bunny. And this means that a product that has the certification means that it was not tested on animals. And the Leaping Bunny has 1,000 brands certified. And of course, you can look and see what the deeper actual criteria are behind that certification. And we have buying guides, which are basically just another form of telling people what to buy and what not to buy. And these they're different from certifications or focused boycotts. They tend to be, come out at holiday time, and they focus on a wide collection of products. This one, privacy not included, is Mozilla's buying guide, one of Mozilla's buying guides. I've sort of some issues with the ratings in this one. Mozilla is rating products primarily based on their ability to spy on you, but I'm not really sure how they determine what ability is, because all of these things have proprietary software, and most, if not all of them, are connected to the internet and receive updates. So do the math. I think they can basically all potentially spy on you. So this is useful, I think, as a guide to determine which ones explicitly spy on you or are known to be spying on you. But at least in my mind, every product in the spying guide does not include privacy, because some of the software is proprietary and communicates with the company that actually owns it, and that's not you. And of course, we know Sony in particular is famous for pushing out a PlayStation update that took important freedoms away from users that they had before. So that update mechanism is used to introduce now features, even if they're not there at the beginning. But still, an example of a buying guide that's focused on encouraging people to make choices around a particular issue. EFF published kind of a non-buying guide, but similar in spirit here. Products that creep us out, what's creeping us out. Encouraging people to not buy many of those internet-connected products. So in addition to buying guides, we can have not buying guides. Those came out around the winter holidays in the US. But I also found an example of a more recent one, the Easter chocolate buying guide, which goes through and rates all the different chocolate companies on various categories: contribution to deforestation, how they pay the workers that harvest and produce the chocolate, and so on. So the FSF has some boycott campaigns. Of course, we boycott all proprietary software, but I want to encourage others to do the same. But I wanted to put a few up in particular and talk about some of the history of the actions that have been involved in those campaigns. So defectedbydesign.org is our campaign against digital restrictions management, or DRM, particularly problematic form of proprietary software. Upgrade from Windows is our ongoing campaign that we highlight every time a new Windows version comes out to encourage people to switch to free software, GNU Linux, instead of upgrading their Windows version. Delete Facebook, and cancel Netflix. So as part of our Defected by Design campaign, we've aimed to have protests at the places where people are going to buy problematic DRM encumbered products. So this photo was at a protest outside the Cambridge Side Galleria, which is a mall in the Boston area. We were kind of gathering the troops and the supporters that showed up, getting ready to put on some bright yellow hazmat suits, to show that DRM is hazardous and you need to be protected from it, and to go into the Apple Store, which is inside this mall. So it turned out when we got to the mall and we're getting ready to go in, the police were already there waiting for us because Apple had called them to tell them that they were concerned about a protest that was about to happen in one of their stores. This was my first interaction. I had only been living in Boston, the Boston area, for a couple of years at this point. This was my first interaction with the Cambridge police. And they were pretty great, because this conversation was the gentleman on the right telling me, oh, I know what DRM is. That's the stuff that won't let me copy my son's music. I'm like, yeah, you got it. That was but that wasn't actually my favorite part. My favorite part was when he said, would you like us to arrest one of you? Like, wow, we didn't talk about that, but no, thank you. He said, well, I thought we'd offer, because sometimes people with these things like to have somebody arrested because that makes for good pictures. Maybe we should have, I don't know. They made me cut the ponytail there when I became executive director, but that's not true. We also had a protest at the opening of a new Apple Store in Boston. And this was kind of another of my favorite moments in this campaign, because Apple really builds up their openings and their product launches, and they get a lot of people to turn up and wait in line outside the stores. So at this event, there were people lined up for blocks outside of the Apple Store that was just about to open. And we decided that we would take a group of people over there, hand out flyers about the problems with Apple, about what free software is. We had some picket signs, etc. And we got heckled by some of the people in the line, including a person who said to me, don't you have anything better to do? It's like, you're waiting in line to get into a store that will also be open tomorrow. Like, don't I have anything better to do? Apple security also tried to tell us that we couldn't be on a public sidewalk, even though they were disrupting several blocks of public space in Boston with their product launch, and I don't think we're giving the city any money in order to help cope with that disruption. We also protested the launch of Windows Vista. We targeted a press event that was in Times Square in New York. We walked around with these signs, and we also handed out copies of Triskel, which is a free GNU Linux distribution. And that was a lot of fun because the people lined up outside of the event waiting to get in thought we were giving out copies of Windows. So we let them think that, and then hopefully they got home and put it in and saw that it was different, but still gave it a shot. And unfortunately, at this event, we also had an interaction with the police, but it was not as positive as the other interaction. Here, the police told us that we could not be walking around Times Square freely. We had to be in a free speech zone. So many people have read about these things in connection with protests against the Iraq War over the years. Well, it also applies to free software protests. So they put us, you can't quite see it from this picture, you can see one tour bus behind us there, and that little box with the stanchions. But also on this side of the picture was another bus. So they built a nice little free speech zone between two huge buses so that nobody could really see our protest. And I sort of looked at the police officer unhappily, and he said, "What? Is there a problem?" I was like, "Yeah, well, people can't see what we're trying to express here." They weren't sympathetic. But luckily, we had gotten some good time in before that, so it wasn't, it didn't totally ruin the day. We've also visited Microsoft stores, and this was for the release of Windows 8. The FSF campaigns team paid a visit to the Microsoft store in Boston, dressed up as the GNU there, handing out flyers about the problems with Windows, the way that it spies on you and restricts your freedom. This protest was also very brief. In the United States, you do not have free speech inside of a shopping mall. That's a privately owned space, so they can tell you to leave, and they did. But we got a few good minutes in, and we're able to bring some attention to the problems with Windows 8. Besides boycotts, we also do have a certification mark, which highlights products that do respect your freedom. So on one hand, we're encouraging people to not buy certain products. With the certification program, we're encouraging them to support certain companies and buy those products. So our goal with this program is to have this mark actually printed on products, just like the Windows certified logo or the Leaping Bunny logo that I highlighted earlier. So you can only display this mark if you meet a certain set of standards that are designed to protect users' freedom and privacy. So the product can't have any known backdoors or privacy issues. It has to run only free software, has to be all the software has to be buildable with only free software, and so on. And we have had an example here from Think Penguin with the mark actually printed right there on the product, along with the other certification marks that you have to sell a radio product and so on around the world. And this is a personal VPN router. But we hope to see the mark actually appearing on products more in the future. We often, people are just putting the mark on the packaging or on material included with the product. We have to do some things on our end to make this program work a little bit better and faster to have it ready at the time that people are actually producing the objects themselves. But you can see it's starting to happen. We also produce a giving guide every year, the Ethical Tech Giving Guide, which highlights not only products that are certified to respect your freedom, but also products that, even though they might not meet those full standards, are still better than lots of common gifts that are out there. So we've had, for example, phones that run Replicant that are sold by some companies like Technoethical. We usually highlight those in the giving guide. They can't be certified under the Respect Your Freedom certification, but they are clearly better for freedom than other phones that are available. And under the Defected by Design campaign, we highlight artists, producers, publishers who make their media available without DRM. And they can display this mark on their site in order to indicate that. And then we in turn list them as well in a guide for DRM-free living on the Defected by Design site. Another resource for encouraging certain kinds of buying that is particular of interest to Debian is hnode.org. We put out a joint announcement with Debian, I think in 2014, promoting this resource. It's a hardware compatibility database, which shows hardware that is known to work without any proprietary driver or proprietary firmware. So in other words, hardware that works with Debian main, right? And I encourage you to check this out and hopefully join the contributor base. It's maintained by volunteers, and it does need a lot more contributions in order to become truly effective. And I know that it could be very useful to Debian to have a solid resource to point to indicate what kinds of machines and components users should buy if they're trying to install Debian main. So do these things, in particular, do boycotts, to start with, work? So this professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania does not think they work very well because they tend to be very brief. They don't last very long. The most that they achieve is the modest goal of attracting media attention. Well, accepting these things as given, one thing's for sure is that they don't work if you don't tell people about them, right? And one of the points of doing protests along with boycotts is to connect important information to products. The Bad Vista campaign for a while was on the front page of search results for Windows Vista when it first came out. So anybody searching for Windows Vista would at least see something about free software during that research. And it was covered also by journalists in the Seattle Times, other places, who were writing about the launch of Windows Vista and looking for the other side, looking for the pros and the cons of Windows Vista, and we presented some of the cons. So at least, even if we're not immediately stopping the sale of Windows Vista or the use of Windows Vista, we're giving people information, and over time, we hope that that causes an impact. And like I alluded to earlier, the first round of Apple Store protests did seem to get attention, and it got Apple's attention, right? They spent some resources on it. They had given instructions to their staff in the store about how to handle the protest, not to try to throw us out, to just let us come in and do our thing and not cause a scene. They had the police there. And I take those things as some signs of success. They're not, it could be that Apple is just messing with us and they're trying to make us think that we accomplished something when we didn't. But I think that it's a sign that people are paying attention to what we're doing and that we do have at least some chance of influencing corporate behavior in the future. And the corporate side, the Apple side, thinks that we have some chance of influencing their market. And so they are taking steps to try to counter that. The protests were also covered in Mac press publications. And so, again, we succeeded in getting some information about free software in front of people who like Mac enough that they read magazines and newsletters about the Mac. Outside of our own boycotts, it's helpful to look at whether other ones have succeeded to see what we might be aspiring toward. The Montgomery bus boycott is widely considered to have been successful. Certainly there were other things that had to be done to advance the civil rights movement, but it's widely regarded as a key moment and a key impetus for more change. The HB2 boycott in North Carolina that I mentioned was also arguably successful since HB2 was repealed. But something to remember when we're talking about boycotts is who is doing the boycotting. And in the case of HB2, it was very large organizations like the NCAA in the US, which is the association that manages college basketball, which is a huge media event. There's lots of money flowing through it. They have a lot of leverage. And the NCAA was threatening, and North Carolina is a huge basketball state. People love their college basketball. And so the NCAA was threatening to not allow tournament games to be played in North Carolina, which would have been a huge financial and reputational hit for the state. And also governments were a few governments said, I think including Massachusetts, they would not fund their employees' travel to conferences and events in North Carolina. So in this case, we're talking about a boycott that seems to have worked or helped advance the cause, but also had a lot of money behind it, more than the $50 I have in my pocket, more beyond the individual level. We also have definitely some less successful examples on that boycott list I presented earlier. The protests against the NFL to stop players from expressing political positions. The NFL's rating did drop. Their viewer rating did drop. But it had also already begun to drop before the controversy. not clear that this was really the reason why. And relatedly, Nike did see a 3% drop in its sales when it signed Colin Kaepernick, who was one of the key figures in the NFL protests. They signed him as their spokesperson. Their sales went down by a bit, but they've since rebounded and they're doing quite well. Companies who work with ICE, like I said, were being targeted. Greyhound, the bus company, was targeted with a boycott for allowing ICE agents to board their buses in order to get people off and deport them or investigate their immigration status. Tech companies who are sharing status or data with ICE are being targeted. And I think this one kind of remains to be seen whether it's having an impact or not. It's relatively recent. But I find this whole idea of boycotting companies in order to influence government behavior interesting and maybe problematic. I'm not saying that I oppose or support the boycotts themselves, but when we think about the connection to free software and what we might be trying to change, when you have a route to impact governments, in theory, especially in the United States, you can vote, you can elect people, you can indicate your support for different bills with your representatives once they're elected. And ultimately, this boycott, even though it's focused on companies, is actually trying to change the behavior of the government. Right? They want ICE to stop doing certain things. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about. Not presenting a conclusion, but it seems like, how does that relate to voting and democracy itself, which is not necessarily an economic decision? And should we be focusing more on that rather than the economic component? So what about the buy this approaches? Do those work? Well, it seems pretty intuitive. If you want to have a business that sells ethical products, you need people to buy them. So if nobody buys them, it seems unlikely that your business is going to succeed. So promoting the products that are ethical and encouraging people to buy them, in theory, should help those companies. That seems pretty obvious. But you still have a chicken or egg problem, which is if you're focusing on, you can fall into the trap of focusing on niche markets. We're appealing to a certain group of people right now with our YF certification who sort of already understand what free software is and why it's important, and we're trying to make it easier for them to buy things that will that will work in the way that they want them to work, and will reward the companies that are doing that. But how do we expand that to make sure that that certification mark or anything other certification marks like that reach more people? You don't need to. Every company doesn't have to be on Amazon in order to succeed. People can be very content with a small company that sells to a certain market. It's still profitable. It still exists. And if we're talking about products that we consider to be unethical, that's not necessarily achieving our goal, that mission at the beginning of the talk of ensuring that everything can be done with free software. And we're actually seeing this kind of niche market concept being used to defeat boycotts as well. I was reading an article, actually it was a NPR radio story this morning that was about how companies are not trying to market to everybody anymore. They find their market, their base, and they market to those people. And they're able to do that successfully, and that's part of the explanation in this story for why Nike was able to rebound its sales, was that they target their marketing through social media and other channels at the people that they're trying to reach. And so you're just accepting that a certain group of people, the free software activists, they're not going to buy your product, but you still find a way to effectively reach the people who are interested in your product and create a profitable business out of that. So that's a limit to be aware of on whether these approaches, whether a boycott approach can succeed in fully changing society in the way that we want to change it. One that's been especially frustrating for me for just personal reasons is the way that companies that you support can be acquired by other companies. And you can really start to blow your mind if you try to think through what that means for consumer activism and the power of individual buying choices. So I'm vegan, and I try to, I buy things like soy milk, vegan products. And the company that my favorite brand of soy milk for many years in the United States, that company was bought by the largest dairy company in the United States. They still make soy milk, right? It's still vegan. But now what does it mean for me to be buying that soy milk, right? Giving money to a company that otherwise produces dairy. And is that still sending a signal that might over time influence the company's behavior? Or is it just creating another compartment for them that they contain and they're happy to keep it going, but they're going to still keep the rest of their business going, and now there's no competition between those two parts? Because of the size of various holding companies and all of the things that they own in the world of technology as well, this can really we could see this starting to become a more relevant factor for free software. Certification, I want to give some stats about how well the certification program has been working at the FSF. We're catching up on the applications, but we are the bottleneck on getting new devices certified. And that's kind of great, right? It means there are companies that are making products that they want to get them certified. Those products are out there. But it's not great because we need to actually get those products out there, build more momentum behind the program, get larger and larger companies involved. We, this year, do plan to double or even triple the number of certified products. We think we can do that. We have 39 devices certified right now. 9 of those were certified this year already. So can we get to 60 or 90 in total this year? I think we can. We will be, if you look at fsf.org/RYF, you can get to the list of certified products. You will see that it is not attractive. Okay, it is just a list, literally a list. And that's definitely a damper on the success of the program, but we are launching a new site for the program very soon, which will be much more attractive for users that are shopping, looking for particular products, being able to search by category, see a little more information about the products, and so on. So I think that'll help the program, and we also have some products from larger companies coming in down the pipeline that I hope will be successful. Right now, the companies that are participating in the program are pretty familiar names to a lot of us in free software. Think Penguin, Technoethical, Mini-Free, Vikings, Ubiquity. These companies are started and run by people who are free software activists. And so it's been really, I've really enjoyed and found it very meaningful that we've been able to help them get more visibility. They're examples of businesses that are trying to do the right thing and treat users and their customers with respect. But obviously, we do want to either have them grow a lot more and be able to serve many more people, or get companies that have not been started with those principles in mind to shift in our direction. We also have to do a lot more research on the program. We know basic stats like this, but we need to start figuring out how to gather sales information. Are these things working? How much does the certification mark influence a company's sales? And try to get some idea of how we're actually having an impact here. So yeah, how do we know we're winning, right? We have to measure the economic impact of all of these approaches, the boycotts, the buying guides, the certification marks. Boycotts ostensibly seek to have an economic impact directly, right? But even if they don't do that, they still might be worth doing because of the way they bring attention to the issue, mobilize, energize people, get people motivated, who may then join us in other kinds of actions, like actions directed at governments to get legislation passed, to remove legislation, or using more free software, sharing more free software. So even if a boycott doesn't have direct economic impact, if it gets news coverage, if it gets participation, if it influences public opinion on the issues, these things may still be worth doing, and that's something to keep in mind for sure. Even though we also need to keep trying to measure the direct impact of those efforts. So I do think that these strategies, these tactics have merit to them, but there's also a lot of caveats with a focus on tactics that are centered on consumer choice or moral purchasing. Proprietary software is subsidized by governments around the world in various ways. In the United States and other countries have a law, well, the US has the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Other countries have similar laws which prohibit the circumvention of so-called technological protection measures. So that's the legislation that makes DRM work. That's the legislation that lets Apple say you cannot install any software on an iPhone unless it comes from the Apple App Store. If you try to modify your iPhone so that you can install Android on it instead, because you can do that, it's just a computer, Apple would say you're doing something illegal, and the federal government in the United States would very well likely agree. We're seeing a little bit of progress in that and exceptions to these rules, but the fundamental rule still exists, and that is a subsidy for proprietary software. That is the government saying, we will put resources behind your claim that users are not allowed to have freedom and control on their devices. So in this case, it's not enough to in a perfect world, we would have equal competition between Apple and a free software company. And if we did our job right, the free software company could just win on merits. But it's not an equal playing field. Right? Apple starts with a giant subsidy. Apple, Microsoft, Sony, these companies start with a subsidy built in from the beginning that props up their business model and gives them an advantage that free software companies have to forego. Also, collusion and monopolies are another way that we may limit or totally defang consumer-focused efforts. This is a very big topic in the US and Europe right now. Are these companies like Facebook, Amazon, Google, are they too big? Do they need to be broken up? And so I think this is related to what I was talking about with companies doing the right thing, being acquired by other companies. That's just an example of how collusion and monopolies can see that there's a threat coming, and they can diffuse it just by acquiring and then changing the practices of that company that they acquired. We also have to keep in mind the education sector, which is kind of outside of the economic sector. Whether people are going to be willing to use free software or not depends on them understanding the ideology. It also depends, and supporting the ideology, but it also depends on them thinking that the software can meet their basic level of needs when it comes to computers. And right now, we know that proprietary software companies get to frame what good software is. They get to define that concept. And they get to do that because of how deeply they're embedded in educational systems around the world. That when you start using a computer, you're using a proprietary operating system, you're using their applications, and that frames, especially if you are, if your life is not focused on technology, that really frames what software, how software should work, and how you expect free software to work if you ever try that. And so that's why we do a lot of kind of mimicry in free software, right? We want to make our desktop maybe look something more like what people are used to, because that is a good way to get people over. But ultimately, it may become a limit on our ability to achieve broader change. There are some things in proprietary software that we don't want to copy. Those things shouldn't exist. And so we're going to have to get into education and get familiarity with free software started earlier so that we don't start off already behind trying to convince people. Other pitfalls that I think we have to worry about where consumer choice focus can actually make things possibly worse, and we have to be mindful of this, is it can shift blame and responsibility from producers to users. And this is something that I try to be very careful with the FSF's approach to these issues, but I know that a lot of people, we've gotten feedback that we come off as too judgmental sometimes or too critical. You don't want to call people who are using proprietary software stupid, right? They're not stupid. They're using something that works for them, and we need to help them understand and raise awareness about the problems with that, but ultimately we want them to join us, right? So we don't want to criticize them, and we have to be careful when we're launching campaigns or doing actions that are focused on the problems of proprietary software, that we don't make people feel that way. And also that we keep responsibility where it lies, which is proprietary software companies producing proprietary software supported by the government. That's where the problem starts. So we're asking individuals to make particular choices out of a sense of responsibility and to help us, but we don't want to do that in a way that absolves the producers of responsibility or makes the people, individuals that we're trying to talk to feel bad. It can also exacerbate the "you're not perfect either" retort. That's another thing that can happen if you are. You can see that you're maybe making someone feel bad in a counterproductive way. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm vegan, I have a leather belt on, right? So if I try to make a big deal about how you should never buy anything that's not vegan, someone would say, well, what are you wearing on your feet? Where are you wearing it around your waist? So if we can't make this a contest about perfection. We need to keep it in the context that this is a tool to try to achieve change. And even when it's not 100% absolute, the more and more free software that people are using and the more they're supporting companies that are producing it, hopefully the more change we can see. We do also have to worry about propping up extrinsic values. The FSF doesn't take a stance on capitalism as a whole, but we want to be careful that we're not propping up ideas through the focus on consumer choice that are counterproductive. So I'm sure it will surprise everybody in the room that RMS does not particularly like the term consumer. But I think his explanation for why this is an issue makes a lot of sense, because when it comes to software, you're only a consumer if you're accepting the proprietary mindset of software is a product that someone gives you, sells to you, and that you then have, but only in the way that they sold it to you. Just like buying a car, you can't change it in most ways. You're just given this thing, you own an object now. That's not what free software is. Right? When you get free software from somebody, you have full control over it. You can modify the program yourself. You can ask someone else to modify the product for you. So you're not consuming free software in the same way that you might consume a product. So this is an example of an extrinsic value that we might want to be careful about not propping up, even while we're encouraging people to buy free software and not buy proprietary software. So where do we go from here? I think, first of all, we keep it up. We keep doing those things. That's my conclusion so far, even though with the risks and the drawbacks and the potential pitfalls, but not by themselves. The moral purchasing is not going to be enough to cause all the change that we need, so we do need to keep the other awareness campaigns and initiatives going. And keep it up is important, because the main reason that's cited in the articles I'm pointing to for why boycotts don't work is because they don't last long enough. Well, that's not a reason to give up, right? That's a reason to try harder and try to find ways to keep attention on them over the long term. We should also look for other strategies, like focusing more on the producers. We're seeing some effective campaigns from within companies like Google, where the developers, the employees, are asserting their power. And we would love to see more of that happening with free software, right? Like, take stances at your employer to the best that you can, and to the best that you can becomes a lot bester if you can get other people to join you. So it's about organizing within those companies, refusing to write proprietary software when you see momentum where you might be able to accomplish that, or at least raising the issue, or encouraging, starting where you can to say, let's make this particular piece of software that we're writing free software. If we saw that kind of pressure, I think we would see a lot more change. I encourage you to do your best with purchasing. Do try to support products that are free software, even if they maybe are a little more expensive or aren't as fully featured, a little bit older, whatever. It's worth supporting, and we are seeing some impact from that. I hope you'll join some of the efforts that I pointed to in order to help provide more information. The people in this room have a lot of information about what hardware works with free software. You're using hardware that works with free software by and large. Contributing to some of these efforts would really help them gain momentum. And like I mentioned, we need to figure out how to measure and study these things some more. For further reading, I recommend there's an article by Mary Kate Fain in the latest issue of the FSF's Bulletin, fsf.org/bulletin, which goes deeper on some of the points that I'm raising here, especially the comparisons to social movements and other areas of human life. And also her Libre Planet 2019 talk touched on a lot of, didn't touch on it, went very deep on some of these points, and that's linked to you from the article. So in Debian, Debian members can be activists, we know that, but can Debian as a project take on more of an activist role? So Debian, in my opinion, is wisely conservative about speaking as a project, as an entity on issues, because taking positions on issues risks disrupting the agreement on the very clearly defined set of core principles in Debian, the social contract, the Debian free software guidelines. Debian advocates for free software every day by proving that you can have free software that is also technically excellent, and in the advocacy of getting people to use Debian. But I at least think Debian can consider doing more to actually add its name to other kinds of advocacy campaigns besides that demonstration. And I think it's maybe an area where Debian and the FSF could work together. In particular, maybe there's an opportunity for us to craft a campaign together that does have sufficient consensus and support within the Debian community, the Debian is willing to actively put its name on that effort and participate in it. And that's something I'm just really interested in talking about. I know it's a complicated issue in Debian, but I think it's worth exploring the ways that, because of the tremendous respect that Debian has built for itself as a community, I think that that could be used towards efforts that might influence hardware manufacturers to, in turn, produce hardware that would be more compatible with Debian, get more Debian users using just Debian main, and so on. So I have at least a couple of minutes. I would love to hear any of your ideas or answer questions about the FSF's history, and I will be here until tomorrow morning. So thank you all very much. Oh, the newsletter is available in Brazilian Portuguese. It has been for several months, so if that interests you, please check it out and maybe join the team to help continue that. Thank you.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are out of time, but I think we can continue conversation on IRC and in person over the breaks, and possibly organize a buff if we want something videotaped. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's some stickers. Oh, the stickers are gone. Oh, no, the stickers are down here. Genuine FSF stickers up here in the front, if anybody would like one.
Stickers!
Thank you all very much.